FarmLink.com's canola school is supported by Bear Crop Science.
Okay, John, canola has definitely been an interesting story so far this year. We're expecting acres to be 18 to 19 million. It's the most profitable crop on the prairies, but we are fighting some serious, potentially negative spring weather with how wet it is. When we look at the price, say of the November future, we were at 600 down to 500 all in the last 30 days. Is this kind of the trading range going forward for canola?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Sean. I do think that in the interim here, for sure, that probably the lows are in. I think it just simply got overdone to the downside. The market, panicked with all the uncertainty, both in terms of Japan and what was going on in North Africa, and kind of coincided with maybe a little bit more of a bearish slant with some of the grain markets in general. Brazilian harvest coming off, Argentine crop looking a little better, and slow down in Chinese purchases and so forth. So you had a little bit of a crack in the fundamentals from where it was very bullish earlier, and then on top of that, just a lot of uncertainty in all financial markets. And so we got overdone to the downside last week, and we've snapped back about $60 a ton here. The question is are we gonna make new highs going forward? And I think on the new crop November contract, it is possible, because I think there's a few wild cards here going forward that we're going to watch that'll really dictate things, and we'll start getting some answers here maybe over the next 30 to 60 days. In the immediate term, everybody's going to be watching this USDA report next week, Thursday, which will go a long way towards establishing some trends here in the shorter term. I think the primary focus will be on corn, but of course that's a locomotive that's pulling the whole grain and oilseed complex here to a large extent. And then of course the big question is what is the spring going to be like on the prairies, and that's that's obviously a huge question mark. Legitimate concerns in a lot of places about the timeliness of seeding and whether that crop, will get in the first place in some areas. So if some of these factors sort of come together in a bullish sense, we could punch through to some new highs. I wouldn't necessarily predict it at this point. A lot of uncertainty here, but certainly some firm undertones here anyway that should be supportive.
So, from a farmer's perspective, when we get the USDA report next week, what should farmers be looking for in that report to tell a good story regarding canola?
Well, I think as much as anything, as I mentioned, the focus will be almost more so maybe on corn than on anything. But I think it'll be not just the numbers themselves, but I think how the market trades those numbers. Anytime there's a report that's as anticipated as this one is, often it's not just the figures, but how is that market responding to those numbers halfway through the trading session at the close of the day the following day. So that's something where we'll really get some cues from, and sometimes these reports are to come and go, and there isn't much of a reaction, but there is quite a bit of a buildup, I think, coming into this one next week, both because this acreage battle for a number of crops is something that everybody has been talking about for a while, so that'll give us a little bit of a hint there. Also, in terms of old crop stocks and supplies, most of these S&Ds are fairly tight, and so that March 1st stocks figure that they'll be reporting on next week Thursday is something that also is going to maybe garner a little more attention than it sometimes has in the past, which again is a reflection of markets being tight.
So, John, when a lot of analysts I've talked to, whether it's wheat, corn, soy, canola, a lot of them are saying we'll know a lot more at July. Obviously, we'll know how many acres are seeded of all the different crops, but July seems to continually every year to be kind of that turning point. Do you see that possibly for this year for canola, where it's going to kind of lay the groundwork in July for whether we should be bearish or bullish the rest of the year?
Well, I wonder. I mean, July, I guess, for a lot of crops, is sort of a make or break time from a weather perspective. I wonder, in some ways, if a lot of that story might not be told earlier, because I think, particularly for something like canola, it's a question of, is this crop really going to get in the ground, and what kind of shape is it going to be in the ground? I mean, weather is always an uncertainty once we get past that point, but it's. I wonder if the turning point or a large part of that story might not come a little bit sooner, at least specifically for canola. And then after that, you maybe start taking your cues from what's going on in corn and soybeans and some of these other markets, and the residual spin off as well. I think not just for new crop, but in terms of old crop as well. One of the things that we need to try and do is ration a little more demand out of this canola market, and somewhere along the line, maybe some of that story starts to unfold a little bit sooner here as well than July. So I suspect some of that will come perhaps earlier than that, at least in terms of giving us quite a bit of direction, and certainly some clues here.
Like you'd think though, for in terms of acres seeded, we're now moving into the end of March. Traditionally, in some areas of Western Canada, guys are getting ready to seed in about 10 days. And canola can be one of those early seeded crops to get that yield boost. You think the acres are decided. The only thing that's going to really change is, can I actually get in the field?
Yeah, to a large extent, I think you're right, Sean. First of all, canola is the one crop that probably above all others, the efforts will be made to get it in, almost regardless of what the conditions are. I mean, there might around the margins be some acres. I think it's a matter of, do the acres get in some of those areas where perhaps the acres just simply can't get in within a timely manner, and then also what kind of shape is that crop going to get put in the ground. Last year in some of these wet areas, there was a lot of crop that got floated on, got put in, got mudded in, and certainly those kinds of things aren't optimal for yield. So there's kind of two components of that as we try and wrestle with. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's how big is the size of that crop, and so that's a combination of both acres and yield, and both of those are big question marks here at this point. So as we said, I think intentions on acres are probably pretty much set. What actually goes in the ground, that's maybe where the question mark lies, and we should know more here hopefully as we get a little bit closer. And there's a lot of areas where guys are worried, and rightfully so. But who knows? Sometimes maybe this weather just breaks, and maybe it gets in a touch late, but it gets in good moisture and things work out. We just simply don't know that at this time.
Well, and the other situation, we're going to know how many acres are seeded, and then the next debate that we'll probably talk about in the future is what are projected yields, and that's a whole other debate. We fought that last year in corn, where we got into harvest and we thought we had a much higher yield than we thought we were going to have. Or we had a much lower yield than we thought we were going to have, and so that surprised the market. So this year's debate will probably be, of the acres that got in, what's the yield going to be, and that's the next debate.
Yeah, no doubt, and it is every year. It always is. But I think again, two components that make that maybe particularly pertinent this year is first of all, again, how many of those acres are getting in timely, in good condition, and so on. And then the other part of it is the canola S&D is tight, as like a lot of other crops, and so in tight markets, even minor tweaks in final yield can have a pretty significant impact on what that carryout will be, which in turn has a significant impact on price direction.
Has there been any? We've had a lot of unrest so far in 11. We've had a lot of unrest, obviously, in the Middle East. We've obviously got a terrible situation that's happened in Japan. Has any of that had any effect on the canola futures?
I think the Japanese issue, initially there was obviously a sharp negative reaction given all the uncertainty. But we sort of felt it was overblown. I think one of the things about Japan, there's a couple things. First of all, is they're a relatively rich country, and so they do have the ability, even in light of this catastrophe that they've undergone here, they do have the ability to continue to source commodities and supplies and food and stuff that they need. The other thing about Japan is they're a sophisticated society, and so they would have the ability to reroute logistics and find other ways of sourcing the product that they need. And so far that seems to have been the case. It seems in a number of these grains, there doesn't seem to be a great deal of some disruption, but not to the extent that a whole lot of cargoes are getting canceled or those sorts of things. Maybe some delays and some natural rerouting and so forth within Japan, but not necessarily the kind of thing that would, over a long period of time, really impair demand. So yeah. I think that's something that initially the reaction was a lot of uncertainty, which is maybe expected. As we're getting past that, I think the market sort of settled down and looking at this from a bit of a more rational perspective once the immediate knee-jerk reaction is passed.
Okay, John. Well, thanks a lot for joining us today, and we'll talk to you again very soon.